Hi, Joseph Gallegos here today, and we're going to talk about the Madera GSA. It's going to get into the weeds so you fully understand how this GSA operates. Okay, the Madera County GSA covers all the areas within the county that aren't covered by other GSAs. And that's very common with all counties, is that the county office is responsible for the lands that aren't covered under current GSA plans. So in this case, you can see all the little red spots and they're spread out all over the place. So they have, it's not one cohesive piece of land throughout this whole basin. And that brings us to a question. Sometimes you hear a term called wide areas versus surface water areas. A surface water area are the colored areas on this map. And this is the same county, but the color areas are covered by irrigation districts or water companies, water utilities. So, and that means that they have canal water or some type of piping water to the farm to be able to irrigate the crops, or in the case of cities, water systems within the cities. Wide areas rely strictly on groundwater pumping. And they're called white areas because that's what's left over on the map. They're all white. So that's how we get a difference. Now, this presentation is going to talk about groundwater. The surface water delivery is a whole nother issue. And with surface water delivery, it can go from 100% like we had here in 2023 to 0%, which we had in 2022. During our drought years, that's when you get the lower percentage up to 0. And on wet years like we had this year, it's unlimited flow that's coming down the canals and through the rivers to be diverted onto farms for utilization. So we're going to talk about groundwater and groundwater rules. So Madera County, for those who don't know, it's in the middle of the state. And the basin itself is kind of in the middle of the county. That's kind of where the aquifer is that we're managing here. The overall goal, as in all GSAs, is to be sustainable by 2040 and to cut the economic loss as much as possible by having extreme conservation, but not without retiring agricultural land. And that's the tough part, is that agricultural land is the main economic driver for many of these regions. So it's important to keep it fully producing. As with all GSAs, there's special terms. In this particular GSA, the total farm acres, that's the total land across the whole GSA as an aggregate. And then you have the active farmland, actually irrigated farmland. And that land is typically a little bit less than the total. The sustainable yield, that's the natural recharge amount. That's the total amount of water that is being infiltrated by through the rain or through storm runoff, seeping into the groundwater. And think of it as a bellow where the water goes up in the groundwater and then it comes back down. And so it's the amount of water that we can pull out of the groundwater without going and having a reduction of the groundwater table. The transitional water, that is the over allocation. That is the actual amount that is being withdrawn from the ground that is not sustainable and forces the groundwater table to continue to drop. And that number needs to get to 0. So we call it transitional water in this particular GSA because it means the water that is going to be allowed to be overpumped for the next 20 years until it gets to zero. And it's ratcheted down slowly so that it becomes less and less and less each year as you go through the period. So it's not waiting until the last day of the in 20 years to get sustainable. It's more of a slow, gradual reduction until you get to that. Until you get to zero for the transitional water. The reallocated sustainable yield, that's a unique item. In this particular GSA, they said, look, we have all this land that we're managing, but there's only a certain percentage that is actually irrigated. So everybody has rights to the sustainable yield, but the ones who are not farming, since they're not using it, we're going to reallocate that water to farms that are using it. And so that's what that reallocation is. In this particular GSA, it has a nice little bump. So we'll see that right now. Bump in actually having available water allocations. So let's break the numbers down. The total acreage in this particular GSA is 185,000 and the active acres are 85,000. So, and they figured that the total amount of water that's being percolated into the ground is 90,000 acre feet per year. So you take that 90,000 and the 185,000 and you come out with, divide this by 185,000, you come out with 0.48 acre feet of water. So the GSA rounds that up to a half an acre foot, so 6 acre inches. That's what you end up with your sustainable yield. When it's all said and done, that's the yield or the amount of groundwater that's available to the farm, no matter what. There'll be 6 acre inches. Unless the sustainable yield at 90,000 decreases or increases, then that number will fluctuate based off of that. Now you have your reallocated sustainable yield. That's the amount of farms that aren't farmed, right? So you've got 185,000 that are total acreage and only 85,000 are farmed. That means you have 100,000 that aren't farmed times the 6 acre inches, as we got the past equation. You have 600,000 acre inches available. Divide that by into the 85,000 that are actively farmed. You end up with 7.05 additional acre inches to work with as a farmer. And the GSA rounds that up to 7, rounds it down to 7 acre inches. So now you have your 6 and your 7. So you're at 13 of your total acre inches allocated per year, no matter what, going into the future. Now here's where it starts to get really interesting. It's what's called a transitional water allocation. So that is that it's at 113,000 acre feet that is being overdraft. That is over the sustainable yield. And that overdraft is dropping the groundwater table each year. So we need to get that to zero in this GSA. That 113,000 needs to get to zero by 2040. And so the way it's structured is that it's going to reduce by 2% each year till 2025. And then it's going to reduce by 6% from 2026 to 2039. And that's off of that base number of 113,000. And what that means is that's what it looks like. So you started out with 15 acre inches on that first 2%, and then it continued to drop of how many acre inches you had available. And right now in 2023, you had a 14.68 acre inches in that transitional yield. But you can see that transitional yield category is going to eventually get to zero. We're not talking about sustainable yield and reallocation yield. We're just talking about the TW bucket, the transitional water allocation. And you can see how it continues to drop. And then at 2040, it's at zero. And that's the goal, is to get that to zero. Now let's add it all together, because it was a little confusing. We talked about sustainable yield reallocation, sustainable yield, and now transitional water allocation. But all together is the numbers. And in 2023, you had 27.7 acre inches to work with as a farm operation. And as it progresses through the years, you'll see that eventually gets to 2040, and we're at 13 acre inches, which is it's a pretty small number. You start to think about it, because in most cases, you'll have a farm operation, and let me tell you about penalties first, and then we'll talk about how this allocation affects revenue. So in 2023, if you use more than your allocation, more than 27.7 acre inches per acre, you're going to be charged $100 per acre foot. So if you want in inches, just take that $100 and divide it by 12, and that'll tell you how much you're being charged per acre inch above your allocation. And then that number continues to get higher and higher and higher until 2027, where it's at $500 per acre foot of your over allocated. So anything above that last column, your total acre inches for the year. So as that total acre inches reduces, your penalties increase. So what does that mean for a farm operation? If I was growing almonds, I typically need about 50 acre inches, and pistachios typically need 36. So if you have 100 acres and I only have 27.7 acre inches to work with, that means I can only farm 55.4 acres of that total 100 acres. The rest of it has to be fallow, so I can save that water and move it over to the farmland that I am farming. And same thing with pistachios. I can only farm 76.9 acres, and the remaining other acreage of that 100, which is close to 24, needs to be fallow. It needs to be torn out, and that water needs to be allocated to that 76 acres. And as you can see, the numbers continue to drop and drop and drop. So I finally get to 2040, and I can only farm, with the amount of water that I'm being allocated, 26.1 acres of almonds and 36.3 pistachios. And that'll be sustainable up until the future, unless the sustainable yield changes, that 90,000 we talked about in the front beginning of the presentation. So this is your long-term water availability for that 100 acres of land, or 100 acres of land, you'd be able to do the 26.1 or 36.3. What's unique about our company is that we're able to grow crops with 10 acre inches and using our aquifer pipe. So if you had our infrastructure in that same land, you'd be able to have 100% production and actually have water left over each year. Even in 2040, you would have 3 acre inches left over. You can't sell that water to another farmer, but you can use it within your own farming unit. And so this GSA allows you to move water, excess water, from one parcel that I'm working to another parcel that you're working. And so you can move it around your own farming unit, but you can't sell it from my farm to the neighbor's farm. That's not allowed in this particular GSA. It might be allowed in other GSAs, but not in Madera. So what does this look like as far as like property valuation changes? This is one of the the key drivers that drives a lot of people, gets them upset because at one point, if I was growing pistachios or almonds, the price of my land was at 30,000, could be as high as 40,000 for almonds. And pistachios, it could be, 38,000 or as high as 45,000 in the past, based off of the revenue that was generated off of that acre of land. And that's key, is that land production is very similar to an apartment complex. So if I have an apartment complex and I can only rent so many of the apartments out of 100 units, I can only rent 55 of them, and the other have to be empty until I find water for the showers and the toilets. Then the value of that apartment complex is only going to be worth the 55 apartments that I could rent, not the full 100. And that's what this is representing, is that I can only farm a certain percentage of my land. That means that the revenue off of that land can only support a cap rate, a reasonable rate of return that somebody's willing to pay for. And these numbers are based off of almonds and pistachio production of 2,500 pounds and a $2 price point, with all inputs considered equal, as what they're currently at, like $1,500 per year on inputs. So the value of that land, the rate of return and what somebody's willing to pay, it drops dramatically. We're already at close to 16,000 and 29,000 as far as theoretical valuation. You may have other people who want to pay higher prices for it, but this is what we're at, based off of the revenue sources. The key is that it's going to drop all the way down to where you only have 13 acre inches, and that valuation drops even dramatically. As you can see, 7,800 to 13,000. You have depreciation of the land value. With our product, Aquifer Pipe, it actually, you're keeping full production, you're generating 2,400 pounds on the almonds. We're not really sure what we're going to end up with pistachios, but it should be close to 3,000. And you're going to see that you're going to be able to maintain that valuation no matter what happens. So your land values remains consistent because you're able to produce yields 100% across all the acreage. So we solve for water scarcity mainly by reducing the amount of water that's used in the growing period on a dry period. When there's availability of excess water, the same infrastructure that we put in for the farm can be used for recharging. So not only are you saving water and not utilizing it during the growing season, but when there's availability of a really wet year and you can recharge all the way into June, July, this system will allow you to do that. It's not a flood mar, surface flood mar, where you can't flood this field and be able to work it. This is a subsurface flood mar where you're able to continue to work on the surface, doing whatever maintenance you need to do as far as shaking or spraying or anything else, and still have the water being recharged subsurfacely ongoing throughout the whole season, which would have been really important for 2023 because it was a very wet year and there was water availability, all the way until August and September. So bottom line takeaway is what is my allocation going forward? And that's what this presentation was really designed for, was to really let you understand what is going to be the allocation by 2040 and how to plan for it, and what is that reduction per year. The website currently on this GSA only extends it out to 2025. And I personally need you to know what the reduction was. So here are the numbers, and hope you have a great day. So I hope that was very informative and that you took away a lot from it. The goal of these presentations is to really inform the farm operations. What are your allocations now and into the future? So you can really plan for it. It's hard not to be able to plan for it with hearing a lot of different information and not having one central spot. How do you figure these numbers out, and what is my allocation going forward, and what are my penalties related to those? So that's it. Be sure to check their website, Madera County website, for any changes, but we'll try to keep this particular video content updated on an annual basis or as things change within the GSA. Thank you for the day.